Hello guys, this is MographLove.com tutorial, and today I'm going to show you a Mograph technique which I use to achieve this animation. Let's have a look. Okay, let's just go through it. We see that we have a beautiful 3D looking universe into which one by one elements pop up, animate, and create this beautiful looking retro styled watch that then explodes back into separate elements. Now to do this we're going to use Cinema 4D and Mograph, and I'm going to show you how to set it up so that it's quite easy to play with the parameters and achieve different looking animation very easily. Now I'm going to really focus more on the Mograph part. I'm not going to go in detail through the modeling process, although I will show how I've done it. The first thing that you need to do if you're creating an animation like this is to find an amazing reference image. Now I found this Casio watch, this digital Casio watch with alarm chronograph. It's also water resist, that I use as a reference to create my model here. Now I had a look at this and I kind of traced all the important features of the watch. So you can see that I used as much detail for my reference image here as I could. And to begin with, I started with using all the different spline tools here to just create these outlines. I used rectangle tool with rounding here for these rounded ones. I use rectangle tools with rounding for these ones that are more rough. And to achieve this this very sort of angled corner, I still use the rounding radius, but I boost up the angle for intermediate points from the default value, which is something you can see on this one is something around 5, but on these more angled ones up here, I just cranked up the value to 90%, and that created this very sort of angular, raw, rough rounding here. Then for the text, I just used the text spline tool, very simple, and I used a box that I scaled for these lines, these separator lines here and down here at the bottom. Now this is quite simple setup, really. Then I went and I used extrude NURBS to extrude my splines. I also added this text, which again is just a text spline that is extruded, and added some materials to add these exciting colors into the scene so that I can look at something that looks a bit pretty. Then I also noticed that I added these primitive objects like cubes here that I then turn into polygons and just scale down this face to create this kind of a shoulder button here. I added a cylinder here, cylinder there, cylinders here to create these actual buttons. And then in the next step, I added some of the elements here at the back, which are important for really having enough detail in your animation. And when you're doing something like this, you don't want the whole thing just come in as one piece, or just have, you know, all these elements as a part of one extrude or something like that. You want to have as many separate elements that then create this effect of, you know, having a lot of stuff, a lot of detail in. That's very important always, to have as much detailing as possible, which is why I just added these random things. You know, they could be parts. This could be the battery. This could be some kind of transistor. This can be your i7 processor. Um, these are the ventilators and stuff like that. Just add as many as you can inside your model, and that is looking rather nice. Now, what is extremely important for this technique is that each and every single one of your elements have a null, or have an axis at the very center of your scene. Now you can see that at this moment that's really not the case just yet. You can see here this cube here has its center point right at the center of the cube. All these elements, they're centered, their axis is centered to the center of the object. While what we actually need is to have, for all the elements, to have their axis centered to the very center of the screen. Otherwise, it's not going to work with our cloner object. Now, to do this, I found that the easiest way, you can see that it's really quite a bit of elements. I think it's about 40 elements. And now this is kind of, this might be quite annoying, but what I did is that I added a null object. I copied the object and then duplicated or pasted the object many times. Let's add 40 of them for, I don't know how many there are, but there might be about 50 elements here. And then I just went and I dragged each of the elements under the null object, so that when the cloner clones these elements, it will look at the null. This is going to be the top one, the hierarchy, which has 0, 0, 0 coordinates. Now I'm not going to go really through doing this again because I've already done that, and it's here in step 4, and you can see that I have all the bits in null objects, which are all positioned, their axis point is positioned to 0, 0, 0, even though the elements inside, like, see this, for example, this battery here, I found it in hierarchy. You can see that the cylinder is actually moved here, but it's grouped and held by this null, which has the center point, the axis point, right here at 0, 0, 0. Now again, this is very important and crucial for our setup. Now, what I'm going to do is, since I have all this ready, I am going to add a cloner here on the Mograph cloner. I'm just going to select everything apart from cloner, and I'm going to make a child of the cloner. Now, this is a rather unusual setup. Usually we just clone one element, like a cube or a sphere or you know, cone or whatever. But here we're cloning all of our elements, and we're just going to clone each of them once. And in our cloner, when we set a linear mode, we're going to reset all the transformation that will happen from step to step. So if I go here and disable this, you can see that these 3 elements actually sit where they sat in my model. If I'm going to go and increase my count, you can see that it's slowly adding all of the stuff that I created into the scene. Now, I know that there were about 47 elements in there. You can see that 47, everything is added. If I add 48, it's going to go again through the hierarchy, and it's going to add some of them twice. So I'm just going to go back to 47. Now the way how I arrived at 47, I didn't really count all of them, but I saw that here it keeps adding, it keeps adding, it keeps adding, and 47, 48, really nothing is being added. So 47 is my number of elements. And now just to explain you what's happening, we added all of these clones, all of these elements under a cloner now. Cloner is going through this list and it's adding it back to the scene. But this time, these are Mograph clones. All the elements, like this number here, the button here, all that stuff is a Mograph clone. Now, why this is useful? Actually, I can see that we are missing the shoulder buttons here. Maybe no. Well, maybe I just forgot to add them. Why this is important is that now when we add an effector, we can work with that effector and affect our elements in our model to create an interesting looking animation. Let's just demonstrate this by adding a random effector. And now you can see that instantly by doing this, we created something that if we would be doing this by hand, we would have to go into every single one of our objects and be offsetting them, let's say recording keyframes for them, doing all that stuff. But with this setup here, I'm just changing one number in my random parameter and already creating kind of interesting look. You know, this on its own is looking rather interesting. Now I can just then go into my effector setting here on the random, and if I animate the strength, you can see that I'm already very simply controlling what's happening in the scene, which is real advantage of using Cloner and using Mograph to create something like this. Now, random isn't the only effector that will create something nice with this setup. Let's go and check out, let's say, a formula effector. Now, the formula effector, without us really having to do much, will create an interesting looking animation. Go to parameter, we can go under the scale and change the way this scales and this moves. We can, for example, just move that in the z-axis. And you can see that this was very, very simple to set up, apart from resetting the coordinates, but that's something that you only have to do once, and after that, you're done. Now, let's have a look and recreate this animation here so you can have a look at how something like that would be done. Now, the first thing that you can see is that at the very beginning, we don't actually see any of the elements, and they start appearing kind of one by one. To do this, we're going to use a random effector. I'm just going to create a new one, and then Mograph effector, random effector. And I'm going to disable the position change, and all I'm going to use is the visibility change. Now, what this is happening is that it's making randomly some of the clones, some of the elements visible, and some of them not visible. If you see, you go here in the effector and animate the strength, we see that they will slowly start popping up as we animate this. Now, we can see that even at 100%, some of them are still visible, which is not what we want them all invisible. And that is something that we affect by changing this minimum and maximum value. If I put this maximum value down, you can see that our clones disappeared. And if I now animate this value, strength, you see that as I'm dragging this, they all are appearing and disappearing. It's something that we're going to animate now. If we go to our first frame, let's just rename this to visibility and record a keyframe for 100% strength. Let's see, actually start somewhere like here, 94%. Select the strength, hold the command and command click. And maybe let's go further to something like frame number 20 and drag this down to where you can see all the frames, which is about here, 47% now. If I go back, play this animation, you can see that from nothing, we draw all the elements in. That's cool. We have half of our job done. Now, another thing that's happening here is that they all start at a different position and build together. That's what we're gonna achieve with this random effector here. You can see that that is exactly what's happening, but we're not only changing the position here, we're also changing the rotation, which is something that's also looking quite cool. So let's go boost this up, and now if we go to effector, animate this trend, you can see that it is very same effect that we got there in our original video. Okay, so I'm just going to boost this set really high, and I'm going to go to the first frame on the effector, again record a strength keyframe, go something like here to frame 30, maybe 50, and go and put this back. So play this animation, you can see that they all go and land nicely at the end frame. Now, what I also used was the formula effector, which I'm just going to use the default value. So to the cloner, I'm going to go into effector, formula effector, and that is kind of going to create all this madness that we will animate from 100 to again 0, and we get to see that our clock, our watch was built. Then we can at the frame 70, we can again record a keyframe for 0, go and boost it up to 100, and do the same for the random effector. The frame 70, let's go keyframe, go to frame 90, set this to 100, go back. We see that we land and explode again. Land and explode, that's brilliant. And that's it really. This technique, like I said, is very useful for when you want to do something like this, some kind of an explosion or some. You have your object that consists of a lot of different elements, and you want to break it apart or you want to animate them separately. This is very nice way how to do that. Again, I'm gonna just remind you that this would not work if these clones, if these elements were not sitting under a null object, which is positioned at the very center. Because what the cloner is doing is that it's using these and it's putting them in a scene, and it's putting each at 0, 0, 0, which is how we arrive at this at your shape. So that is it, and hope to see you next time.